Hello and welcome to CGTN's chat room. I'm Yanjar, your host today. It's been 15 days since the Russian carried out a special military operation to its neighboring Ukraine, and a few days ago we have witnessed the both sides sat down for their third round of negotiation, but unfortunately no solid progress has been made, and today we realize the operation on the ground is still ongoing. So today I'll be joined by Ken Huang, Chief Editor of Russian Service CGTN, Chen Shiwei, politics analyst, and Qiao Liang, specialist in international and Chinese politics. Also joining us later will be our analyst and a stringer around the world, including Yan Wuser in Kiev, Daniel Hawkins in Moscow, Matthias Sorby in Kharkiv, Michael Voss in Lviv. Also, CGTN reporter Li Jingjing and Mr. Li Yong, visiting fellow in Tsinghua University, will join us live. And also, we also invite you to be part of this conversation by sending us your topic, questions, comments that you want us to talk and discuss in this chat room to stringer@cgtn.com. And also, you can check out CGTN's YouTube channel where you can participate in a poll to show your preferences on this topic. There's been over 2,000 people voted. And the latest development, gentlemen, latest development on the battlefields and global influence is leading this poll. So we will, so that will take us more time to discuss those topics. So it's not just up to us, but also it's up to you to decide what we talk in chat room. Okay, so the Russian military claims they have destroyed 90% of airfields across Ukraine, and also shelling in Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, in the north, is still continuing. Gentlemen, how about we start with the latest development on battlefields? And I realized, Ken, we have a new toy today with us in this chat room. Ken, can you just show us the latest development? And maybe we can also review what has happened in the past 2 weeks.
Okay.
It's been a long...
Okay. Let's go. 我们可以先看一下这个有没有地图是吧？我们可以先看一下。
Our producing.
So let's show the map, please.
Can we see the map?
Quite clear on what is happening.
是这样首先呢，可以讲一下我们得到最新消息呢，这个乌方已经宣布从乌克兰时间的昨晚21点到
starting from the 9 a.m. yesterday to 11 p.m. tonight, it is going to be a period which is going to be a temporary ceasefire where the two parties is going to stop.
So is this the nationwide ceasefire, or just in few cities?
A few cities,
just
few cities, full cities. 但是呢，尽管如此昨天呢，这个还是有战事发生，我们可以简单的来回顾一下一个呢是在这个北线北线呢，我们可以看一下这个主要的战斗还是在这个基辅附近，就是在大约在这一线 因为这个基辅北边呢有一个小镇叫伊尔平镇啊，是在基辅的这个西北边，就大约在这个位置上啊。我可以用这个蓝点标一下啊，大约是在这个位置上啊，可能在靠前一点。然后呢，还有这个在布查这两个地方呢，这个
There are quite severe battles
都发生了激
occurred
战
in these two
而且
towns.
在这两个地区呢，参与作战的呢，实际是这个车臣的部队啊，这是俄方的在这儿部署了一些车臣的部队。但是目前呢，在这一地区呢，这个没有明显的这个进展啊。目前呢，乌克兰政府军呢，主要是在这个防守基辅北边和这个西侧。
Currently, the Ukrainian governmental troops is defended the Russian troops to the north and to the west of the city of Kiev,
东部地区，
which makes the
此前呢，
Ukrainian
另外呢，
troops
在这个哈尔科夫地区
unable
呢，
to
就是我们看一下
reinforce its troops and
对
its
哈尔科夫地
north.
区啊。
And so
在这
here
个
it is the
这个方
second
向呢
largest city of
这个
Ukraine,
这几个地区
Kharkiv.
呢，包括切尔尼科夫，
It
这三个地
reported
区呢
no
目
battles
前呢
so
是
far,
没有
and
这
it
个
reported no
太
progress for the
明显的
two
这个
armies.
战事吧啊。
This has also
另外呢
happened
这
in the
个
town
乌
of
方
Simi.
的报道说啊，这个俄军呢在哈尔科夫的这个包围圈呢，
According
实际
to
呢
the
现在呢是被
Ukrainian
突破了啊
reports,
也就是说呢，
the majority of the
实际情
Russian
况是这样，就是
armies
在哈尔科
is
夫啊
being
这个俄军
clustered
呢
up
集
to
中在哈尔
the
科夫东部地
east
区
part of
在这
Kharkiv,
个地区。
while the other
北边
Russian
呢和西
troops
边的俄
to
军
the
呢，目前呢
northwest,
是
to the
返
north
俄
and
境
to
内
the west
进
side
行
of
整
the
修
city of Kharkiv has
Yeah,
retreated
Kharkiv
back
state.
to the Russian
因
side
为这个我
for
们都知道，这哈尔科夫啊，距离
further
这个俄罗斯
supplements.
边境啊，实际距离只有50公里。
We
这个
all
非常近
understand that
所以北部
Kharkiv
和
is
西部的这
still
个
quite
据这
some
个
distance
乌方报
away
道啊是一
with
个手，但是俄方
the
呢至今
city
没有
of
消息
Kiev.
啊。
Just a little references
According
for,
to
for
the
our
report
audience
of the
today, it's over
Ukrainian
1.5,
side,
even
the
though
Russian
it's,
troops has retreated for
even though the
further
military
feedbacks.
operation, in the Kharkiv has been during the ceasefire for a very short period, but there are still over 1.5 million of the city's residents are in urgent need of food, medicine, and clothes, and Kharkiv is the most devastated city under Russian bombardment since February 24th. So that was still a key target of the Russian troops.
但是另一方面呢，这个乌方呢，这个宣称呢，就是俄军
At the same
对哈尔
time,
科夫市内的这个
The
攻击呢
Ukrainian
还是没有
government
停下
has
来啊
claimed that
总体上是
the
这么个
Russians
形式
attack
啊，所以我们现在如果
toward
看一下
the
战
city
线啊，
center of
大
Kharkiv
体的
has
这个
not
战线呢，就是
ceased.
当然这个基辅
So
对吧？
if
这是
we
在
are looking at
这
the
个
front
俄军控制
line,
区大
it
约
is
是这个
going
位
to
置
be like
然后
this.
这个切尔尼科夫呢，实际也是处于这
Kiev
个包围
is
状态
under the control of
然后
Russian
战线呢，
units,
实际是贴近这个俄罗斯边境啊，然
while
后这边
the
苏维呢，基本也是这个
Kharkiv
情况
is still is
所以呢
actually
这个
quite
目前
in
的
line
战
with
线
this
呢
site.
是这么个
It
这
is
样的
quite
一个
similar
形
to
式
Kharkiv.
啊。
That
这
is
是
what
基本
is
是在北线
happening
的
in the
That's
front
that's a
line
basic
of the two
situation
troops.
in the north line.
That is the
对，
northern
这是在北线。
flank of
And how about
that
we
is
stop-
north line
stop
of the
right here, because we
situation.
have been joined by our stringer, and I think Martia is right
Yes,
now is the
yes,
Kharkiv.
Martia
So we can
Kharkiv.
talk to Martia.
Yes.
Martia. Hi, Martia. You been with us?
It's 10:07 in the morning in Kharkiv. Actually,
Yeah, we realize
We
you're
have
in
been-
you're in a room. You're indoor today.
yeah, I am in my room. I am in my room for several reasons. I can broadcast better. It's -8 outside, and especially we have been shelled. Just entering in the conversation straight away all night long, and the important mall only 7 minutes away from my room has been completely destroyed in the night. The name is Nikolsky Mall and is on fire right now, and they just were able, the local police and the army, to clean everything and to dominate the fire, which means that the weak ceasefire has been completely stopped after 24 hours, and we entered again in the war for Kharkiv. I wouldn't be too surprised if during the broadcast from my window you would hear some shellings, because we don't have to emphasize the risk, but this is just the way it is. The Russian army will conquest Kharkiv only using Air Force, because I can report that 16 hours ago, the small but strategic town of Derachi was under the control, and it still is under the control of the Ukrainian army, which means that Ukrainian army are defeating the Russian army on the ground. I repeat, the important and strategic village of Derachi is under the control of the Ukrainian army. This is a big news, because if you want to enter in Kharkiv, you have to win Derachi. And it seems that after 2 weeks of battle, they just cannot enter in Kharkiv. And the only solution they have is, frankly speaking, destroying completely the city. Like in the night, we have been shelled with more than 100 missiles.
Martias, so what about the residents of the Kharkiv city? Where they are right now, have they evacuated? Because I remember earlier a few days you mentioned about this, the downtown of the Kharkiv has been a ghost town, as nobody was living there. So it was, and it was just a conflict between these two troops. But what about the residents? Where can they go?
Yes, Xuzi, thanks for asking. Day by day, Kharkiv, due exactly of the situation that I just described, is losing approximately 50,000 people per day. So these people still living in the city where I'm reporting are completely inside their apartments. Yesterday, thanks to the relatively peace, we have been able to buy something in the supermarket. I personally live in a privileged situation due to the fact that my hotel, the only bed and breakfast open in Kharkiv, is providing some food for me every night. So for sure, I report from a privileged situation. Answering to your question, the 600,000 people still remain on the second largest city. They used to have 1.5 million inhabitants. They stay home, even if during the day we are able to walk outside, and definitely for my reportage, I go out. I would say that 99% of the 600,000 people remain are living in their apartments. They don't open the door to anybody. There is a sense of fear, and this sense of fears is due to some infiltrate Russian army that can easily break the curfew. And after 6 p.m., when nobody's supposed to walk in the city, some Russian army might operate for some dangerous operation. So there is a sense of fear that I can definitely report you.
Okay. How about we talk to Yan? Hello, Yan. You with us? We have been discussed the latest development on the battlefields, and we've been just discussed the north line of the military operation, and it seems there's a lot of attacks are still surrounding the Kiev. So what is the latest situation in Kiev?
Yeah, hello from Kiev. Here it's late morning. Not as you guys, you have afternoon. The situation in Kiev is fragile, I would say. Considering when Matya talked about Kharkiv, or when you see what is happening in Mariupol, I am so glad that we have anti-air defenses in Kiev. So I suppose that what is happening in Kharkiv or Mariupol or other places it's impossible to happen in Kiev at the moment, because the Russian Federation war machine is not looking for a straight fight. They are just looking into shelling the citizens into submission, so they can just roll here in columns, which is I have no idea that this is the kind of warfare I never seen. This is my 10th war conflict, and this is the first time I actually seen something like this. So they are playing for time. Usually, when you have a war conflict, you want to have sort of like blitzkrieg. That's what the Russian Federation wanted. But it's not happening in Kiev. Yeah, they are shooting down their airplanes. They are shooting down their missiles. We can see less and less of these alarm sirens for air raid sirens. We see less and less of shellings in Kiev, because when the war started, it was heavy. It was like every hour, every 2 hours, night, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and now just 1, 2 times, 3 times a day. Of course, there is shelling. Of course, there are rockets falling in Kiev, but mostly they are shut down. So what is falling in Kiev is the shut down rockets and the debris. That is also dangerous, as I seen the debris fallen in children's playgrounds, preschools, and that is war in Kiev. Mm-hmm. But what the Russian column, the Russian Federation war machine coming to Kiev, or wanted to enter Kiev, and they are right on the outskirts of Kiev. Mm-hmm. They are trying to encircle Kiev from west. From the west side, to sort of cut us off. I suppose strategically it makes sense, but also it makes sense that people are scared and fear, and they try to get away, because everybody thinks that they take the west side, then they go south, and then they will go north around Kiev. But that is not going to be easy. The Ukrainian army are really, really, really tough fighters. They are fighting Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are fighting the Russian Federation forces with so much focus that I have seen actually Russian tanks running away from a city near Kiev. So what is happening here? It's a humanitarian catastrophe mostly, but it is really dangerous, because if the Russian forces will manage to cut us on the west side, it will mean that the trains will stop going to the western Ukraine, and that will be a real problem. But they are being held at the northwestern part of Kiev, where is the Irpin, Hostomel, and Bucha. This is sort of outskirts of Kiev, a conglomeration of 3 towns, but they are technically just 5 square kilometers. And as you see everywhere, people are fleeing in huge numbers every day. And I would say that if you look at the Irpin Bridge videos, or the Irpin Bridge problem with the refugees, the Russians have the same problem. There is a river called Irpin, based also the city of Irpin is based on that.
Hi, Yan.
Yes?
So compared to the few days ago, so what was your feeling about this? The pace of the military operation, is it getting intensive, or were you thinking to keep the same level compared to the days ago?
It is slowing down, but the word on the street is that they are waiting for supplies, fuel, and they are waiting for a second wave of Russian forces to come and strike on Kiev. If you look at Irpin, that's 1 kilometer from Kiev. Literally, there is a straight road, and if they get through the Irpin River, they just can drive to Kiev, because there is just nothing. It's a straight road and forests.
Okay. Ken, Yan also mentioned about Irpin, the city that was near the Kiev. Why this city is so important, or strategically critical?
Actually, it's just a little town. Actually,
it's not very big, but it was strategically important.
Also, but it is a gate to the Kiev. So it's important.
The problem is that we have seen the city of Irpin.
The production team, we want the map. We want to. Can we have the back? Can we have the map back again?
Please put map back.
Let me continue to talk about the Irpin. It is located to the north of Kiev. It is just the gateway to Kiev. If you are quite familiar with the local geography, So how should I put it? If these two towns were conquered by the Russian army, it is going to be said that the Russian troops has opened up the northern gate of Kiev. That's the reason why they have deployed a lot of army to the south and to the west of the Kiev. This is actually the latest update of the north line of the military operations for the Russian troops. This is where the Russian troops actually controls. One thing we should look at is the north, is the eastern line of the military operations. The Russian unit actually controls Kharkov and one of the major towns, which is called Izium. It is located at the crossroads of Kharkov and Donetsk. It is a town which is unknown to people before these military operations, but currently it is sitting at a very important location, where once this town, if it is falling in the hand of the Russian units, it is going to be changing the situations on the battleground. If these two troops are meeting with each other, it is going to say that the troops is going to create a besiegement.
Donbas region, so
yes.
Will be surrounded by
from Donetsk.
Let's look at the east wing of this battlefield. Lugansk. The local army of the Lugansk has made some of the breakthroughs, moving its troops to the boundary of the state, somewhere quite near the state of Kharkov. Besieging the Ukrainian troops in this area, what we called Northern Donetsk. It used to be the center for the eastern wings of the Ukrainian troops. That is to say, they have caught the back way of the Ukrainian troops. This is what happened in the area of Lugansk. And what's more important is that after this encirclement is achieved by the Russian troops, that is to say, the eastern part of the Ukrainian troops is being divided into two wings, the northern one and the southern one. That is to say, there is a very huge encirclement in this area, and there's a very small encirclement in this region. The Ukrainian troops controlled some of the pathways from the northern part of Donetsk to the Kramatorsk to Zaporozhye. This is the only passage which is being controlled by Ukrainian troops. For other areas, it is under the control of Russian troops. Currently, I believe the Russian unit is stationed here.
So we had this earlier discussion that for the goal for the Russian military forces was not to take down the big cities, especially when they encircled Kiev. They were kind of just waiting and waiting. But just now, judging by the video footages, we can see very devastating pictures and videos that in the cities all the buildings have been torn down and demolished, and residents are facing difficulties of getting supplies. So my question is, the goal for the Russian military forces in the Ukrainian cities, are they remain the same, or they have changed or slightly changed a bit?
Excuse me?
Oh, I mean, the goal for the Russian military operation in those Ukrainian cities, especially in the big cities, are they the same, or they have changed? Because I can see, judging by the video footages, a very devastating pictures of the buildings being,
Because basically military infrastructure have been wiped out.
Yeah.
What about their next objective for this operation? Taking those cities or taking those strategic...
It is difficult to draw some conclusions, but the goals of these military operations, I believe that the Russian units is not targeting at occupying cities. It is designed to demilitarization of the Ukrainian regions. That explains that why to the south and in the city of Kharkov. It is besieged for several days, and also the city of Kiev, and also Chernihiv. It is also under the besiegement. There is not a very severe bombardment or fire occurred in this region. The Russian troops' target is still fighting at the Ukrainian troops and through a military operation. But this brain has been cut into two.
So they are after the Russians are after the Ukrainian armed forces.
Yes.
So my understanding is one stone kills three birds. First, to consolidate the actual control in the Donbas region, like the Lugansk and also Crimea. The second one is to demilitarize the Ukrainian government forces, and the third one is to win more bargaining chip in the negotiation table. So I think that is kind of Moscow's strategy in this kind of military operation.
So, gentlemen, so what should we focus on in the coming few days? Maybe in the can we have the map again?
Yeah.
Can we have the map again? Maybe Izium. Is that, am I pronounced right? That small town right here.
Yeah, Izium.
Should we focus on this the battle, the military operation right here in the coming few days?
Actually, because
which is more important?
Because Izium was controlled by Russian army now.
Okay.
So it's in the Kharkiv state or the border area.
No, I think we should focus on this region. Severodonetsk and Kramatorsk. This region.
So there will be the fierce conflict between a Russian and Ukrainian army in the coming few days.
Because
right here in the north.
50,000 soldiers.
Ukraine?
Yeah, Ukraine.
So Ukrainian troops has been here. Okay.
In a block.
Before that, the Russian troops had sent some of the messages to the Ukrainian troops, asking them for any responses, but there is no response coming from the Ukrainian troops. There is going to be a very severe battle on the battleground.
Let's look at the south line.
In this region, the south line is actually the most fierce, where the most fierce battles occurred. There are two reasons behind it. In the area of Mariupol, where I am pointing at, it is the center for the Izum camp. It is one of the endogenous growth power of the Ukrainian troops, well equipped and brave to fight.
The Azov battalion is also the major target of Russian troops.
The city of Mariupol is one of the strongholds on the battlefield, connecting the online pathway between Russia to Crimea. The battles in the city of Mariupol is unavoidable, and the two parties are not going to withdraw in the city of Mariupol. And there is also an encirclement occurred in Mariupol, where the Russian troops has encircled Mariupol from the Russian side, moving westwards, while the Donetsk local military troops is also pressing north. Occupying the Belgansk and pressing ahead to the Mariupol. So the encirclement was gradually generated.
In Mariupol.
There are two camps of the Izum camp fighting in this field. And while for the military camps in Donetsk is also moving toward Mariupol, there is a very fierce battle occurred in the city of Mariupol.
I want to give you for your references. So this is the southern Black Sea port city of Mariupol, and also the city's residents have entered its 10th days without electricity, water, heat, or food. So it's been surrounded. As Ken mentioned, the troop has surrounded the key city, and there will be going a fierce fierce military operation.
对，所以这个地方
I
呢
have
还可以
something
再
to
补充
add
一
up
句啊，
in
因为
this
此
region.
前呢这个根据
According to
俄
the
乌双方
previous
达成的协议
agreement
啊，
between
开
Russia
辟了
and
这个马里乌波
Ukraine,
开辟了人道主义
there's
走廊啊，一
two
条走廊呢是从马里乌波进
humanitarian
入俄罗斯境内
pathway
啊
in
我们绿
this
色标识
region.
1
One
米
is
左右
connecting
然后另一条
Mariupol
呢
to
是
the
从马里
eastern
乌波
of
到达
Russian,
扎波洛
and the another humanitarian pathway is connecting Mariupol to
但是目前
Zaporozhye.
呢可能这个
But
走
currently,
廊
the
这个效果并不是特别
humanitarian
好，因为俄
pathway
罗
is
因
not
为
being
俄乌双方都在
implemented
指责对方
fully because the
破坏
two
协
parties
议
accusing
然后都在指责对方
the
临时
other
的
party
炮击
of
这个
breaking
阻止
the
这个
ceasefire
这个
agreement.
和平居民从人道主义走廊撤出啊，目前这么情况。
We believe
相
in
信
the
呢下
future
一步在
days
这个马里
there's
乌波尔
going
会
to
有
be
非
a
常激
fierce
烈的战争
battle
啊。
occurred in the
一方
city
面
of
呢就是
Mariupol,
这个战争呢
since
目前
there
已经
is
陷入
going
胶
to
着
be
状
a
态，因为
very
这个显然需要一
heavy
个
attachment in this
阶段性的战争
field.
成果。那么另一方
While
面呢，
the Russian troops has
这个
achieved
乌
some
方
of the
的军事这种能力
periodical
啊
success,
是极为
the
坚定，而
Ukrainian
且作战
troops is
经验
well
非常
equipped,
精良。
experienced in the
所以在这个地方，马里乌波尔
battlefield.
地区
So
下一步
there
发生
is
这个
going to
战
be
争
a
呢
very
是战
severe
斗
street
的应该是
fighting in the city of
在
Mariupol.
前
It
5
is the major
大
battleground
的啊
during the current
我
Russian-Ukraine crisis.
是这么情况，这是朴子莹在这儿。
Okay,
所以
we can talk to our strainer in Moscow, Daniel. Just to give us your overall evaluation of the current situation on the battlefield, because here in Beijing's chat room we've been talking about the latest development on the battlefields, and the attack will be focused on Mariupol in the next stage. And as we mentioned, the military infrastructure has been basically being wiped out by the Russian troops. So what will be their next objective?
Well, as you rightly say, this really marks a change in strategy in terms of the conflict from the Ukrainian armed forces. The Russian Defense Ministry gives daily briefings on the situation on the battlefield. In their last briefing over the last 24 hours, Major General Konashenkov, who is the Russian Defense Ministry spokesman, confirmed that around 90% of Ukraine's aerial ability, air power, that's planes, that's landing fields, that's military bases that service Ukrainian helicopters, had been wiped out. And of course, President Zelensky had been calling in desperation for NATO states, for Western states to provide fighter jets. There was some discussions just yesterday, I believe, between Poland and the United States for Poland to transfer their MiG-29 fighter jets into American hands in exchange for F-16 fighters. Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, rejected that proposition. So it's unlikely Ukraine can replenish those supplies. Now, as I say, this marks a shift in terms of the capabilities of the Ukrainian army. They are likely to focus now on bogging down the Russian military's advance as much as possible on the outskirts of cities in urban fighting, because they will now lack that aerial capability. In terms of that southern area, that southern corridor, Mariupol, which we spoke about, the Russian army, of course, seeks to create a land corridor between the republics of Donetsk and Lugansk in the east, the link to Crimea and surrounding area, and to the west of that, to the city of Odessa, which is likely to be one of the next targets for the Russian military. It's another key port city which leads to the western borders. Overall, strategically, I wouldn't say that southern area is a particular priority right now for the Russian military. The focus there is getting civilians out through the humanitarian corridors. Strategically, the priority for the Russian military will be its advance from the north of the country and surrounding Kiev, the Ukrainian capital, as both a symbol, of course, and as both a concentration of troops. I understand from reports by the Russian military, there's around 50,000 Ukrainian troops which are trapped around the Donetsk area. They're being surrounded by both Russian forces and the militia forces from the republics of Donetsk and Lugansk. That will be a big blow to the Ukrainian army in the south. But the priority is in the north and around Kiev, because should the Russian army surround Kiev and cut off, I'm just hearing myself in my ear.
Yeah, you can take it off.
Yeah, I'm going to take it off for now, yeah.
Sure.
The key, as I said, will be in the north and the central areas, because the aid that is coming in from NATO states, who mentioned the UK rather, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, saying the UK will be providing Stinger missiles, Javelin missiles, focusing on aerial defense capabilities of Ukraine against the Russian Air Force. They are coming in from the west. So cutting off those supplies of weapons, that's going to be the real focus for the Russian military, as opposed to the so-called mopping up operation that is going to be taking place in the south. And the next 2 or 3 days are really going to be key. We've heard a lot about that huge Russian convoy in the north of Kiev, where Mr. Hussar was saying that's been stuck there for some days now, lacking supplies, lacking fuel. They will be waiting for replenishment and reserves coming in from Russia, likely coming in from the north and from the northeast, before making that final push south of European. But really for Russia, the north and the central for the Russian military will be the priority to stop those supplies coming into Ukraine, because once they stop, the Ukrainian army will very much find itself in a difficult position and unable to further resist the Russian advance effectively.
Yeah. Shive, let's talk about social media on this, because it's been 15 days, it's over 2 weeks. I think it's a narrative, the sentiments on the social media has been changed dramatically. They might have split, they might have changed over the time. You might just brief us a little bit on this. What did you see on the social media?
Yes, for sure. As the conflict has prolonged into this over 2 weeks, the narratives on many social media, like including Twitter, the Telegram, the Facebook, and many others, are changing. So from the beginning, actually, many people on the social media are not that rational, and most of the people are express their sympathy to the Ukraine people, like a lot of hashtags has been put on and trending on social media. But in recent days, people are trending 2 important issues. First one is about the reasons behind these conflicts, and more and more people are aware of the geopolitics, highly incentives in this kind of these conflicts, and will be the main driving force for this conflicts, and will escalate it. There are some risks. And the second one is that people find that there are also internal conflicts in the Western alliance, especially among NATO members. So for example, the recent the Poland-US struggle about the airplane delivered to Ukraine, because there are kind of collective security defense article in the NATO chapter. But Poland don't want to risk itself. Its foreign minister already said we are not in the part of the war. So now people see the Western allies are not very solid, unified. There are a lot of internal conflicts, and in face of this kind of risks, they don't want to put real help, but no one wants to take responsibility for inciting these conflicts, and even the conflicts are continued, they cannot bring a very productive proposal to end this kind of conflicts, and just adding oil to the fire. So now the narrative is very diversified.
I think what Shive mentioned about is that the U.S. Department of the Defense dismissed a proposal from Poland to transfer its Soviet-era MiG-29 jets to Ukraine, and calling this plan not tenable. So why does conflicts are between Poland and U.S.?
No, it's not a conflict. It's a very simple, actually. A dialogue just like so, bro, you must help Ukraine. No, I don't must. Why me? No, you must help. No, why me? No, you must. So please.
So it becomes kind of a joke on social media. Many people there, they just portray it as a joke. Like Poland says, okay, you want me to deliver this aircraft, and now U.S. please take my aircraft and you can deliver that to Ukraine. But U.S. said, oh, come on, bro, we are all the NATO members. This is will bring a lot of security concerns. That is not good for NATO. But Poland maybe replied, oh no, I'm a NATO member, but I'm not a part of the war, so why should I take all these kind of risks and responsibilities? So you can take all the weapons and you can give me a new one.
So we're seeing the United States is trying to control everything, but they want also to stay away from the whole issue.
They don't want to take any responsibility.
They want to be involved in this conflict with the minimum cost.
don't want to take any responsibilities and just to blame others. So it's kind of blaming game now.
And I think there's another reason. It's a very important reason that the United States don't want to enter another conflict with Russia.
Face to face.
Face to face, because a nuclear country is very different experience, maybe.
Because previously, like in the Syria conflicts, the NATO members, for example, the US and also other NATO members, they don't want to have a face-to-face conflicts with the Russian troops there.
Let's hear the take of Jingjing. Is Jingjing with us today? Hi, Jingjing. Can you hear me?
Hi, I can hear you. Just switch to a better internet.
Okay. You ready? We've been talking about social media. There's been a sentiment that is changing on the social media, because as the conflict is ongoing, there's lots of things that have been changed over time. So what was your take on this?
I mean, right now, I think we are focusing more on the sanctions now, because basically we've seen all kinds of sanctions being thrown on Russia, and the goal is very simple. They aim to cripple Russia's economy, and basically all the Russians are isolated from all the world leading technologies, the economic system, everything. And but to understand this, I think we have to look at the nature of sanctions. You know what? Like, there's even a book called The Art of Sanctions, written by Richard Nephew, and the guy who is one of the leaders who designed and implemented the U.S. sanctions on Iran. And he wrote this book basically to try to teach people how to maximize the effectiveness of sanctions, because sanctions now has become a tool to force other countries to follow certain foreign policies. So now basically sanctions are being used at the United States and also as all these Western allies as a tool to punish Russians. But now, I mean, in the name of justice or defending or protecting some people, they're actually punishing the average ordinary Russians who have nothing to do with their government's actions. And using these sanctions, they already used these sanctions on Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, and what did they do? All those people, ordinary citizens, civilians, couldn't even have access to basic food or medicines because of the sanctions. And this is what they are trying to do on Russia now. But you know what? They want to punish average Russians, but they're not just punishing average Russians. They are also punishing average Europeans, because Europe is very integrated with economically with Russia. And Europe is highly reliant on natural gas, oil from Russia. I think 45% of the oil of Europe is actually from Russia. And just a few weeks ago, Germany suspended the certification of Nord Stream 2 pipeline. That's a big deal, because that's a very easy way to bring all the gas from Russia to Germany. But now, with all this cut off from the gas, the natural resources from Russia, average Europeans have to pay much higher bills, the electricity bills, especially in the winter when they want to warm their house, and also when they want to add fuels to their cars. The average Europeans have to pay much higher price for this conflict. And I can bring an average European voice to this because I'm very active on Reddit. And I'm updating all my followers about the situation. And I got an Australian user and a European user arguing in the comment section, because the Australian user basically very angry at Putin's action. And he said, well, in terms of the gas and the necessities, you can trust Australia. Australia is stepping up. Our gas will be cheaper. And then a European user is basically very angry. Are you telling me that you will transport your Australian gas across the world to me in cheaper way? And for average European living in France and Germany, of course, the cheaper way is from the neighboring Russia. So, and he said, you guys have no idea how our prices increased already and how our economy is tied with the Russian resources. So probably this is the concern for average European now. They don't care who is right or wrong in this conflict, because their life will be in crisis because of the economic crisis brought by this conflict, because of the threatens, U.S. government threatens all these Western allies cut ties with Russia. So I think the biggest loser and sufferers from this conflict is just the average Europeans.
Yeah, as Ginger mentioned about this, is the energy is the big consequences, and it's been as one of the biggest consequences after this conflict and after these sanctions, because the latest development is that U.S. President Joe Biden on Tuesday signed an executive order to ban imports of Russian oil, natural gas, and coal, while giving American companies 45 days to wind down existing contracts for Russian energy supplies. That, gentlemen, I think that was the latest development of the sanctions on this on the energy. What was your take on this? The energy price is soaring right now around the world, and people's life has been affected within this conflict zone and outside the conflict in the rest of the world.
Actually, if we go through this executive order detail, you can see there are some internal conflicts with its European allies, and also within its own policies. Number one, U.S. is not highly dependent on Russia's oil and gas because it has own oil and gas, and the gas from Russia only accounts a very, very few amounts in the total energy consumption in the U.S. So the U.S. doesn't need that. But you see, in the executive order, the U.S. doesn't ban the import of uranium from Russia, which accounts a huge number of U.S. imports, which will supply the American nuclear power plants and to generate electricity. That is the U.S. core interest. And you see a lot of U.S. companies are dealing with the Russian mine companies on this kind of nuclear power plants materials. So the executive order doesn't ban that one. So the top priority is the political message to maximize the impacts of the U.S. ban. Just say we are the leading forces against Russia, and we are representing the justice. And the number two is, you see, there are also internal conflicts between the U.S. and its allies in Europe. Many European countries like Germany and Bulgaria, they say they will stop some kind of trading with the Russia, but they didn't kick like Gazprom Bank, the major bank dealing the gas exports in Russia, out of the SWIFT system. And Bulgaria says we support all sanctions from EU against Russia, but no oil and gas because they really, really need that. And many people on the social media, they also post about, there are also debates about the sanctions, about the effects. They just raised another issue like 4 decades ago, the oil shock in the Middle East. The oil producers are many in the Middle East countries, but the oil consumers are really suffered a lot. But you see, for the oil producers, they didn't suffer too much. So even for today, even you want to find an alternative sources for the energy supply, but that will cost a lot, and that will be a pretty long time, and you need a lot of investments. So that is an economy issue, a technical issue, and most of the ordinary people, supply chains and industry, they cannot wait that long because they need the energy daily. So that is the issue. The politics matters in this kind of issue.
是这样的，我认为呢，这个里面还有几个因素我们要探讨，就是说，像刚才是吧，你讲的这个，我认为也很正确，就是。
that the U.S. import of the Russian energy sectors, including the oil and petroleum, is accounting for 80% of the total market. It is a very huge share of the whole market. On the other hand, from the U.S. government's side, they do hope that their energy supply could account for a huge market share in the European market. It is the internal diplomatic issues of the U.S. For one part, the Republicans is actually supporting for the or energy companies to extend their international market share. So they are supporting the sanctions. They also want to see the U.S. energy sectors to
所占的这个比重。北方民主党人呢，他们这方面实际也这个对这个切断这个俄罗斯这个能源进口表示欢迎。这个道理很简单，因为民主党呢，它作为美国这个内阁左派，它一直主张要推动清洁能源，是吧？
always advocating for the clean energies and environmental friendly actions in the U.S. Under these joint forces, President Biden has signed this sanction toward Russia's energy import. It is something self-evident and obvious move for the U.S. But the European Union is highly relying on the Russian energy supply, no matter from Germany or Netherlands. The Russian energy supply is closely located with Europe, and it has built a very strong infrastructure, including the pipelines. Even though the European Union is still pushing forward the advancement of the new energies, the natural gas can still be used as a transitional energy supply.
It's not going to happen overnight.
Cannot be replaced one night.
In addition, I think the sanctions also brings new geopolitical changes to the existing world political system, because we can see today that the U.S. has been talking to Venezuela. The two countries had been in cold relations, but the rising gas prices has.
所以很抱歉打扰一下，我这里边想
突然
有一个想法，就是说，看来这个美国呀，总体国家实力呢确实是大不如前。如果是放在美国这个国家实力比较高的话，它不会高所以这个后果其实可以想见，对吧？因为此前关系紧张的这种程度，是吧？委内瑞拉
So it is easy to get the answer from the Venezuela side.
Yeah, we've been also joined by Mr. Leon, is our our experts on energy. Mr. Lee, can you hear me, Mr. Lee? Okay, I think we have some more comments on this. Oh, there's more comments from our Facebook. And it says, I agree with Jingjing's argument. Military. Oh, okay. So Jingjing is still with us. There are some comments talking about you. I agree with Jingjing's argument. Military action aims at military forces, but sanctions are against all people of the country, and the current U.S. sanctions are affecting other European countries and could even backfire U.S. consumers. So why has the U.S. applied the sanctions? You want to have some? You want to reply to this viewer?
Well, I guess I would just share my 2 cents. I'm not sure whether I'm right. I think right now, what kind of reactions that Europe have to provide towards Russia is very divided. European Union is very divided. What kind of attitude, what kind of actions they have to choose. And because Europe is economically very integrated with Russia, and it feels like to me, the United States are trying to cut these economic connections between Europe and Russia. And for example, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, Germany suspended the certification for this pipeline, but it feels like the United States is still not happy. They basically want this pipeline to be dropped, to be completely dropped, because they don't want to see in a few years this pipeline resumed again, then the economic connection between Europe and Russia is back. No, they want it completely destroyed. So then what are Europe going to do? They will choose other countries to find these resources. They have to go to the United States. And the United States will be the biggest exporter for the gas and all these natural resources. So, I mean, who benefits from this? It's quite obvious to me that the only country that will benefit from this is the United States. And Europe will be isolated from Russia, and Europe won't be the top reserve money anymore, because the euro will be weakened because of the economic crisis, and the US dollar will be the biggest, strongest reserve currency.
So Daniel, we've been talking about the energy because we know this. The U.S. proposed sanctions on the U.S. on the import of the Russians' oil and natural gases. But U.S. as we know, the U.S. is a country that can rely on their own oil reserves. But this is not a case for European countries. So what can they do? are they going to follow the United States to cut this the supply of oil, natural gas, and coal supply from Russia, or what they can do?
Well, that's right. I mean, we spoke earlier just in the context of, Poland and the US and the question of fighter jets. And this is another example of the US really trying to push a certain agenda, trying to push certain decisions from across the Atlantic where they are affected in a minimal way. And actually, having said that, today, over the last 24 hours, gas prices in the US have hit record highs since 2008, $4.70 per gallon. So it's not to say the US is entirely unaffected, but it's Europe that is directly next to Russia that relies on so much of its energy needs from Russia that is really paying the price. We spoke earlier about some restructuring that Europe could perhaps get some of its energy needs from US imports, from LNG, liquefied natural gas. That's going to cost the EU an increase of $70 billion if they are to do that. And those needs are going to be met by European consumers. In the UK, we're also seeing record prices at petrol pumps. The UK, of course, has indicated they're going to phase out Russian oil dependency by the end of the year. We've seen companies like Shell and BP refusing to renew their Russian contracts. That's all hitting consumers, hitting ordinary people at the gas pumps. And of course, it's not just about petrol. Oil is used in a variety of plastics manufacturing and a bunch of other sectors. And that's really driving up inflation, not only in the UK, in Europe, but across the world. Inflation is at a 30-year high, a record high in the United States. That's something the Fed has been trying to deal with. And these sorts of decisions are going to make it harder. We also have to remember the US, of course, relies on around 8% of its imports, oil and oil refined products from Russia, whereas Russia's exports to the United States make up around 0.9%. You can see the difference here. Russia can make up that export to any number of its other oil consumers, from China to Turkey, Europe, some other Central Asian states. The US is going to have to make up a much larger difference, around 8%. And that oil is going to be more expensive because it's going to come from Canada, from its northern neighbor, from Mexico. So really, in English, we have an expression, cutting off your nose to spite your face, doing something to hurt somebody else, which ends up hurting you. That's what we're really seeing from the US, except it's not only US consumers that are going to be paying the price, it's the European partners and allies who are going to be really paying the brunt of this. And the US Strategic Petroleum Reserve has around 727 million barrels. Joe Biden has said he's going to dip into that to try and make some sort of impact on gas prices. That's really not going to have enough impact. The US is a very oil-thirsty nation. We all know they love their big SUVs. It's really not going to have much of an impact in the short term. Absolutely, in the medium to long run, there might be some sort of diversification of energy supplies. In the short run, this is really going to harm consumers and manufacturers all over the world. And we've seen statements from the IMF, from the World Bank, from China, saying that the
do you believe the European countries will turn to U.S. to buy the energy?
It's unlikely in the short run. I mean, look, I'm no economic expert, economic analyst, but I mean, a $70 billion rise in energy prices for LNG is just too big a hit to take. And we've seen real divisions in Europe over this as well. Countries like Hungary, Bulgaria, Germany saying, look, we're not going to cut energy imports from Russia. This is going to cause chaos on the currency market, on manufacturing. And of course, this isn't just about oil. I mean, if we take a look at the wider commodity market as well, Russia's a massive producer of various commodities like steel, gases, neon, xenon, palladium, aluminium. Nickel has risen 50% pretty much overnight here, as Russia has threatened in response to these very harsh sanctions from the West. Russia said, look, if you're going to hit us with these sanctions, we're going to hit back with our commodity exports. This is going to have a real impact on manufacturing across many sectors. Around 200,000 jobs in Germany alone rely on car exports to Russia. We've seen German manufacturers pulling out of the Russian car market. We've seen prices on metals and commodities rise. This is going to have a really big painful impact on consumers in Europe and on companies as well.
Exactly. Mr. Leo, we want to hear your takes on this, on the energy issue, because what or how this conflict will influence the energy supply and energy price, because we've been seeing on the social media that people have been suffering from the soaring oil prices in some parts of the world. So what will be the next?
I just want to update you on the dynamics of the energy market. Yesterday, the price of oil has plummeted by 10%. Surprised? Is that correct? Right? Everybody is surprised. Why is that?
Yeah.
There are basically three assumptions. One is the complete cutoff of the Russian energy supply, oil, natural gas, and so on. The other is the concern that the OPEC countries will not be able to put additional supply. And the third one is the escalation of the Russian-Ukraine conflict. And that seems, all the three factors seems to have been eased, okay, because of the refusal by some of the EU countries to cut off, the demand or the purchase of Russian energy. And some of the OPEC countries have promised to put on additional supply, like UAE. Even though the daily addition of their supply is not going to make up the assumption that they completely cut off of the Russian, and that will leave a gap of
well, this connection is very weak.
Yeah.
How about we get back to this? How about we get to we give Mr. Leon some time to set up again, and we get back to this chat room on.
Okay.
Well, still on the energy.
Yeah.
You
heard about this, how people say about this their energy supply.
对，其实我想补充一下是这样，就是俄罗斯呢现在每天出口是大约原来是760万桶，其中呢60%到70%都是原油，就是说它这个实际是占了全球这个原油出口量的64%是俄罗斯的份额，这个份额很大的，所以
That is a very huge share in the global market. Against the backdrop of Russia-Ukraine conflict, it is impossible for the Western countries to sanction in terms of the crude oil supply. Russia also have around 70 million barrels of the crude oil in storage. For a short period of time, it is creating the rocketing of the oil price and also the oil-related futures. In OPEC's estimation, this rise of the price is also going to continue for the period. Actually, if this trend goes on, and if the United States government has still conducting one-side sanctions, the price for crude oil is going to jumping into $300 per barrel. We have known that at the European countries, the oil price is also jumping. If they want to fill one tank full, it is going to be €100. To put it as a joke, it is even higher for a customer to buy a bicycle instead of feeding that tanks up. This is what we call a sanction cost, rise of the oil price, creating a lot of impact to the European and the U.S. market.
But for longer term, will U.S. benefit from this sanction on the oil? Because they have their reserve oil, they can also sell their oil to the outside world. For a longer term, will the U.S. benefit from this?
It's difficult to say. To the long term, it is not with the interest of the U.S. side. We understand the basic principles of the market economy. Where there is demand, there is supply. The U.S. way of sanction is deteriorating the market. We believe the oil price is going to jumping back with more supply from the market.
Yeah, and also you see from the supply side, recently there are some messages that the US and EU may let the JCPOA concluded and let Iranian oil to be a kind of supplier, and also US is talking with Venezuela, but taking the huge share of Russian oil gas in the global markets, and you cannot find a replacement from Iran and Venezuela, and also technically speaking, the oil from these two countries, they need a little bit higher cost for the refinery, and especially compared with the cheaper oil and gas from Russia. So that is the economy, that is the real cash, and even they are seeking alternatives. The price will go high. That will contribute a lot of inflations, and which is not very good for the economic recovery from the global recession right now, and even for the long-term economic development. You see for the rising price of oil and gas, that will again blow the global airlines industry, which is are still suffering from the global pandemic. So that will affect a lot of industries, that will cause a chain effect. That means other industries, the transportations, the logistics, the daily food necessities, the price all will go up, and that will harm the globalization and also many countries, including the ordinary people in the US, because the ordinary people are still suffering from this higher price, and also other sectors are still suffering.
But the rising oil prices will definitely hurt Biden's administration, because the Democratic Party is running for a midterm election, and Joe Biden is running for potentially re-election, and he's been accused for causing inflation. So I think the rising prices will definitely hurt his administration.
Yeah, but Biden that doesn't say it's my responsibility, it's Putin's responsibility. Yeah,
no, of course,
the blaming game.
But it will hurt him. It will hurt.
And there'll be another story that they can blame the Russian again, say this is because of this conflict.
Yes.
And causing everything just change. All right, so we get back to Mr. Lee. Hi, Mr. Lee Yong.
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me?
I'm so glad that you're coming back with us. Go ahead with your analysis.
Yeah, I think what will be the future determinants of the energy market. I think it is not really the military conflicts. I think it depends very much on the sanctions, how long it is going to last, and this is one thing. And the other thing is, we need to realize, the impact of the energy price hikes are going to have a serious impact on the downstream industries. For example, potash fertilizer. They're going to use a lot of energy in the production. Okay, and then the plastic resins like polyethylene, polypropylene, polystyrene. Those are the materials that are used in the manufacturing of a lot of things. For example, the white goods, the electrical home appliances, all of those will add up, to the production manufacturing costs, and those are the factors of inflation. And, if they are going into the production system, the inflation is already built in. It is not just like the fluctuation of oil price, on the market. Traders are manipulating the prices, but the end users in the downstream industries, we see the direct impact on transportation, on the gasoline that people use in their cars. But, those manufacturing industries, they are using it, at a higher price, and that is going to be translated into higher, products that they produce. So this, and that's not end of the story. Okay, if, for example, the price of polyethylene is going to go up, agricultural film, which people use or farmers use to build greenhouse, is going to go up. That is going to increase the cost of green. you know what I mean? And the higher grain price is going to undermine the poorer countries' ability to purchase their needed food supply. So, thereby worsening the prospect of, food crisis or the global food security picture. So we need to really to be able to see the picture in the wider spectrum and to understand the impact. So some of the impact has already been there. So the key issue is not just the short-term rerouting of the supply routes. It is also about the impact on wide on a lot on different industries, on the global economy, okay, and on the, of course, on the average prices of industrial products.
That's right. There's this consequences.
What is the cause of this? I think the cause of this is the sanctions. Okay, we need to look at the sanctions. When they are going to be lifted, if the sanctions is going to be there, no matter the war has stopped, if the sanctions is going to be there, and then we're going to see long-lasting effect of what we see today, okay, on the world economy. So we need to be aware of the cause and effect situation. It is not just about the military conflict, okay? It is also about the sanctions.
Yeah. That's a good idea. That was a very, very good point. That if this conflict is over, will the sanction be moved? Everybody.
I don't think so. I think the sanctions would be longer. Yeah, would be longer.
Or the sanction might be the target, and the sanction might be the objective.
And the side effects of the sanctions will continue. So previously, I worked for some companies overseas for their business, and now you see after this kind of sanctions, all countries, especially for this business, no matter big or small, as long as they have any business link with Russian companies, they need to review their contracts. They will need to hire a lawyer and to review all the contracts to avoid any kind of risks. That will, of course, raise the transaction costs, and they because they are afraid of targeted by the U.S. because of the dollar system, of the SWIFT system, and also CHIPS system, which has provides a kind of financial hegemony for the U.S. regulators. So that will raise a lot of cost for the transactions, and all the transactions, this kind of cost will be paid by the end consumers, and that means the long-term effects for everybody, including the big companies in the West, because they are still trying to cut off all these kind of business links. For example, BP, Shell, and many other American mining companies. Previously, they have a very, very huge market, and even some of the leaders, for example, the Rex Tillerson, he was even awarded by the President Putin for his contribution to Russian energy sectors. You see how closely the business ties between the West and Russian top leaders. But now everything has changed. They need to spend a lot of money, and they are really worrying about their assets in Russia will be a casualty in these kind of geopolitical games. So that all this cost will be paid by the end consumers, and that will contribute a higher inflation globally, which will affect every individuals.
Yeah, I want to cut in. I'm sorry. I want to cut in with some of our comments from the Facebook users. What realistic options do U.S. refineries have now that Russian oil imports are restricted? The best option would be the Gulf states, but that would demand big changes to Joe Biden's Iran strategy. Xiaoliang, you have something to say about this?
I don't think fundamentally the U.S.-Iran relationship will be changed by this crisis, but there would be more negotiations just to show how willing the Biden administration is to solve the conflict and to bring down the prices for his campaign matters. Doesn't mean that he is he is going to think about from the Iranian side. No, he's thinking about his own re-election. He's thinking about his own political party.
Actually, for Tehran, they have this kind of interest to lift all these kind of sanctions so they can sell the oil to the European Union. But you see, technically speaking, Russia is also part of the JCPOA, and if Russia is not willing to cooperate on these issues because of lack of mutual trust between the European parties and Russia, they can hardly reach a comprehensive deal. And if this deal cannot be reached, the sanctions will remain, and Iran will have very few chance to export more energy to Europe, especially to ease the shortage of gas and oil. So that is more about economic and technical perspective due to my previous overseas experience for some companies. Yeah.
Martia, let's get back to this energy topic. You're also coming from the European countries. What was your take on or how Europe reacts to this latest sanction imposed by the United States on Russia's oil? Or will European countries follow that? Hi, Martia. Can you hear me, Martia?
The signal is
I think you have to set up again. There is something happened to your
microphone.
Mute?
Microphone muted?
No, it's good.
It's good now.
Yeah.
Yes. Sorry about that, guys. In the meantime,
I know
really,
you've been working very hard and focused on this latest situation in Kharkiv, but as a reporter coming from the European countries, we want to hear your takes on this issue, the energy issue.
Thank you so much. I've been listening. It's a great question, actually. I've been listening carefully, everybody, and especially I want to underline the point of Li Jingying and of course our analyst Lee then explain with percentage amazingly the problem is a great I've been thinking the same for days, as you said, as European. Let me tell you that Li Jingying points strike me so much. How these sanctions have been used as a tool since the beginning of the conflict, and previously since 8 years from now. By the way, when this war, nobody knows when, will be over, the sanction will last. So let me answer a little bit from not immediately, but I want to tell you. I really think that we are facing this war because of the sanction. I mean, it seems to me, my personal opinion, but I think Russia was attacked by this sanction for having taken Crimea and Donbass. Let's think for few seconds about Crimea. We have a Russian military navy base in Sebastopol. It's hard to argue that Crimea is not Russia. Frankly speaking, I'm Italian. My country do the best to make this peace finally happening. But regarding to the sanction, it seems to me the people, like we have been saying, are suffering. The war, it might exactly because of the sanction. The energy price everywhere, I can tell you, my friends in Italy told me 1 liter of oil today is 2.1 euro. As we said, I agree with everybody else here in the room. The only money maker eventually of this story is the United States of America, that I love very much. How is possible to keep going to sanction Russia if we know that we are facing this war exactly because of the sanction? If it's a question also for everybody else, if we want to really analyze objectively in a serene way the reason why this war happened, Russia was under sanction for 8 years just because they tried to keep Crimea with them, and of course Donetsk and Lugansk with Russian people speaking this language in these regions. I understand the Ukrainian point of view really much, but it's hard to believe that Crimea is not Russia. It's hard to believe, and they have been sanctioned, and now no McDonald's, no Coca-Cola, no Mastercard. Which kind of peace? Which kind of peace we want to build in this war without Russia? As European, I'm telling you this. It's obvious to everybody that this is a geopolitical war, that Russia and America
can I understand what you said as the United States is trying to
let me add the final I appreciate the kindness of you to listen. I was finishing saying, let's be clear that this is a war because Russia and America don't find a compromise, a geopolitical compromise, even in Africa. This is a problem that they have had in Sahel, in Syria, since they don't find a compromise on Assad. In the civil war of Syria, the Obama administration, it's clear to everybody, that took Ukraine. And Ukraine, after 2-3 centuries of history under the Russian Empire, in 2 months became under the American control. I don't judge anybody. These are facts. I'm not saying what is true or not, but for sure, as Lin Jing and Li Ji, then everybody said amazingly, we have a war because of the sanction. And as you guys said from the studio, why Russia should stop this war if they have no guarantee to have no sanction in the future? We are in a point where Putin has nothing to lose.
I think Marty is pointing to the United States now.
Yes. It's a very bad way. It's a very bad way to use the sanction. It's a very criminal way to use the sanction.
And who started this sanction is the thing that we should consider.
No, I said, I give the speech to my colleagues, but I said clearly that the United States started to use this sanction because Donbass. Everybody in Europe, the analysts said, oh, of course, we have to sanction Russia because taking a part of land of another country is a very dangerous precedent. In English, precedent. It's arguably to say this is a precedent because Sebastopol, where I have been many times, has one of the largest Russian navy. In Syria, they have another Russian navy base in Antakya. It's hard to believe that Crimea is Ukraine due to the fact that since forever, the Russian Navy is one of the most important strategic base of the Black Sea.
Thank you, Marty. Let's head it over to Jingjing. It seems that Jingjing has something to say.
Yeah, thank you, Matthias, for, I think, which we talk about sanctions. I want to stress, as I mentioned earlier, there's even a book called The Art of Sanctions to teach people how to maximize the effectiveness of sanctions. And they know very well what sanctions do. It's not, we've seen that happen across the globe so many times. They put sanctions on Venezuela, Cuba, Iran. I mean, what happened? In the name of protecting or giving the freedom of certain group of people or protecting the rights of certain group, they actually get those people out of job, put those people in hunger, because they don't allow any business ties with those people. We saw the inflation in Venezuela grow exponentially. Tons of money couldn't buy a thing. And because of the sanctions during the pandemic, people in Iran could have problems to access the basic medicine. I mean, how could you say I'm protecting people for your good, and we don't allow your access to any basic food, medicines, and jobs? So, I mean, the function of sanctions are very, very simple: to create unrest, to create chaos in the country, so there will be poverty, unrest in the country, and eventually the people will start riots or whatever to overthrow their governments. That's what they want.
Yeah.
So, I mean, sanctions are really basically a foreign policy tool.
I'm reading those comments. I'm reading those comments in the Facebook that exactly what you just say. So the U.S. is applying the sanctions for its own benefits at the cost of other countries and even the world's efforts to go green. And there are some more.
Yeah.
Oh, they mentioned about this. The White House has threatened Beijing for not following the U.S. sanctions against Russia. I think that was the latest in news. Now that some European countries have stated that they are not going to cut off oil and gas deals with Russia, how would the U.S. deal with these countries? Mr. Liam, can you reply to this comments?
Yes, I think, those European countries refusing to cut off their, purchase of energy from Russia is something I think the U.S. cannot really find a ground to really, to reject. And, some of the countries who refuse to condemn Russia may receive, some sort of sanctions. And those European countries, I don't think, they will receive the same. And as you can see, there are some sort of a double standards. And if those European countries continue to purchase oil, natural gas from Russia, and what is the use of kicking Russia out of the SWIFT system? And which are the Russian banks are going to be using the SWIFT system, to really get the transactions done? So, the future of the sanction picture is going to be very complicated. And from what we see today, I think the sanctions are more than enough and has been radicalized. If we look at sanctions on cats, it has become a joke, right? And people don't seem to take it as a joke. And some of the companies continue to do those stupid sanctions, like, not supplying Coke. That is, I just don't see the rationality in putting those, sanctions. And then if we have to give an explanation, probably that is going to put humiliation on Russian people, putting humiliation on President Putin. And of course, the ultimate purpose is to erase Russia as a kind of an economic power. And in which case, the U.S., superpower position is going to be strengthened. So far so good. But whether this is going to happen in ways that, in ways that American have expected, let's wait and see, because, gradually, there will be another kind of a consensus being built that it is not a kind of a sanctions based on justice.
Mm-hmm.
It's based on kind of a selfish purposes, okay, benefiting, specific countries, a specific country, or specific groups of countries. But the consequences will have to be shouldered by the rest of the world, while some country will, harvest the benefit. This is not what the...
All right, seems connection has been halted down. Yeah. Let's get back to this chat room, because I've been just told that the foreign minister from Ukraine and Russia are expected to meet in about, I think in about 30 minutes. What can we expect for their meeting? Maybe Zhao or Shu Wei.
Yeah, this is definitely a very positive sign because it's the first time for the cabinet level negotiation.
Yeah, that would be the highest level of this.
By so far. And obviously, all parties are having high hopes. That's why just we should be keeping an eye on it, just focusing on what is going on there.
Yeah, especially I think for the non-NATO models maybe will be one of the main topics in this kind of meetings, because whether Moscow will accept it or reject it, or Moscow will have their new proposals in this issue, especially the Ukraine said we need a kind of international treaty to replace the 1994 Budapest Treaty to give kind of security commitment to Ukraine and to keep, and the Ukraine government is open for the discussion about neutrality, but does that very close to Moscow's demand of neutrality, maybe one neutrality, two explanations, so that will be main topic for this discussion.
Yeah, that was a major topic, and that was the major topic that we can talk about that later. Because, but now I want to turn to our colleagues, Mike Voss. Hello, Michael, who's in Lviv. Yeah, you've been following this the humanitarian corridors and humanitarian aid. What latest can you tell us about this?
Well, some of these humanitarian corridors and the ceasefires worked. Some of them absolutely didn't work. We have been told figures between 35,000 and 40,000 civilians did manage to escape, a lot of them from areas like Sumy, in these corridors. They're now, some of them are staying in country, some of them have come here to Lviv en route to going to Poland. But beyond that, the United Nations estimates that about 12 million people, almost 30% of the population, need some form of humanitarian assistance. We've heard a lot about the 2 million refugees that have left the country, and that is one area of humanitarian need that obviously has focused attention. We've seen lots of pictures of that because the Western press, the world's press, can get to places like Poland and Hungary and Moldova and talk to people there. It's much more difficult here internally to look at the situation. So as well as these 2 million civilians, these 2 million, mainly women, children, old people who've left the country, the United Nations estimates there are 1.5 million IDPs, internally displaced people. This is the term that's used for people who've had to flee their homes but stay in country. And it's how to look after those that is the really big problem. And how does humanitarian aid come in? It's very difficult. It is coming in through here, where I am in Lviv. On Saturday, the UN, UNICEF, the UN Children's Fund, there was a convoy of 6 trucks came in, bringing mainly medicines, but also blankets and other things. And there are quite a lot of individuals and charities. You see vans turn up. Here in Lviv, there are reception centers for people who are not going on to Poland or delayed going on to Poland. But getting aid in is becoming a major problem.
Okay, do you have any latest news about China's first batch of humanitarian aid for Ukraine?
Well, certainly it committed roughly $800,000 of humanitarian aid. No details yet of what that consists of or how it's coming in. No, we don't have details of that. Okay. We know China has committed the money. How it's getting it in and who it's being directed to, we're still trying to ascertain.
Yeah. The donation includes daily necessities, the water, and some blankets which are very urgently needed. And I think maybe they already left yesterday from Beijing and by flight. So maybe they already arrived. I will check the details later. Yeah. This is the first batch of China's emergency humanitarian aid, and maybe we will have more aids from China also. Yeah.
How do you know how it's going to come in? How they're managing to get this aid into the country?
Before this chat room, I checked. There's no details yet. I will check later, and I will put the updates on my Twitter account also. Because yesterday I already tweeted, and a lot of people are very curious about where to land this kind of donations and how will be distributed. And I will keep it and update it, and I will let more followers to know the latest updates. Yeah.
Hi, Michael. Hello, Michael.
Hello.
You've been just arrived in Lviv. Can you just share us a little bit about how you get there, and what was the situation when you get inside the Ukraine, and have you gotten chances to talk to these ordinary people who is fleeing this country? Any story to share with us?
Sure. I came in through Slovakia because there's a much smaller flow of refugees coming out through that border crossing. Sometimes you can have up to sort of 10 kilometers of cars all backed up on the Polish border. So getting to and from those borders can be more difficult. We decided to come in through Slovakia. When I was at the border crossing, there were refugees going out, but in small numbers. Those on foot, there would be minivans waiting on the Slovakian side. Maybe every 10 minutes, a full minivan would take families further into the country to reception centers. Easy enough to cross the border. Certainly when I was at the border crossing, on the Slovakian side, there were two Ukrainian women carrying big bags of equipment for the Ukrainian army. They're things like thermal night scopes, rifle scopes, and were having trouble getting them in. Then the drive up, it's about a 4-hour drive from that border crossing to Lviv. We passed probably 5 checkpoints. The fact that we're foreign press, we have to have proper press credentials with photographs to get through the checkpoints. All were absolutely fine. Lviv itself is this beautiful historic city. Before the war, it was the most popular tourist destination for people visiting Ukraine. And it's a long way from the fighting, so it hasn't been bombed. I did see some people, some shops shuttering their windows just in case. People are trying to get on with their daily lives, although in the back of their minds there is this fear that the war could come here. Everyone's thinking about how they can help people. I've talked to some of the refugees coming out, and it's harrowing. They're having to leave husbands or sons behind. Sometimes their parents are too old or immobile to get out. A lot don't know. They're getting out of the country, but they have no idea where they're going yet. But people are rallying around. Certainly in Lviv, you've got all sorts of municipal places, big municipal art centers. There's a museum, there's a church. All of them are housing refugees at the moment. Those that either want to stay in Ukraine or not sure or waiting to get out. I was at one yesterday, an art center, and it's sort of an overnight stop. If people aren't sure what to do, they come in, they can stay the night or they can stay the day, and then they'll find housing for them. And they also bring in psychiatrists to work with them. Apparently, a lot of people are having difficulty crying, for example, about what's happening. And then there's the children. So they're doing what they can here to help the refugees as they pass through.
Yeah, but you mentioned about those people, they have no idea where to go. Is there any organization like UN or Red Cross or other countries' organization are leading those people when they leave the Ukraine, or give them?
I mean, those sorts of things are taking place, I would think, mainly in Poland, but also in the other countries. At this end, there's no one that can really direct people on which country to go to. You've got things like Wizz Air, the Hungarian airline, that I think has offered 100,000 free flights to Ukrainians to get to wherever countries they want to go to. But I haven't seen any, certainly here, I haven't seen any coordinated effort by the UN or anybody else to place people.
Okay, thank you, Michael. There's Michael Voss reporting in Lviv. Gentlemen, you have some more questions to ask, Michael? Or should we get back to our earlier discussion about non-NATO models, which is a new concept, right? We've been invented
by Ukraine side. Yeah,
I think that was been started from the third round of negotiation, and the Ukraine said they can accept any of this kind of a new NATO model. What this model could be like?
So, as Ukraine chief negotiator said, this kind of security guarantee shall be signed by major powers, including like the U.S., UK, European powers, Russia, and neighboring countries, like, for example, the Turkey. But here is the question is about the definition about what is the non-NATO models, because we know the neighboring Moldova, that is not a NATO members. They have kind of different links with the NATO members, but Ukraine is pretty special. Now it's in a conflict situation, and they have the several regions, or they have the self-declared republics, and the Crimea was also annexed by Russia. And so how to define the area to keep this kind of security, because if in this kind of international treaty, there must be have the definition about where shall be guaranteed and where shall be protected. Does that covers the whole region of the Ukraine, including the Donbas region, including Crimea? But that will be not accepted by Moscow, because you see for the Moscow's demand has never changed. The Ukraine government must recognize Russia's sovereignty over Crimea, and also to recognize the sovereignty of the two self-declared republics. So that is one of the key parts. And for the NATO side, for European side, UK and US, they are also reluctant to this kind of international security guarantee because of the areas that covers. So if this kind of security guarantee also apply to regions in Crimea and Donbas, that will bring NATO a kind of potential risks. And if this kind of area doesn't cover the Crimea and Donbas region, that means the EU, the NATO, the US, UK, they have accepted that Ukraine government doesn't have any sovereignty over this region. But that will against Kiev's stance. So you see, there are a lot of internal conflicts, not only within Ukraine government, but also among major powers, especially the lack of mutual trust between the West and Russia. So it is pretty hard to get this kind of international guarantee. Like in 1994, at that time, Russia and US and Europe, they have a very good relations. They have the mutual trust, they have the coordination. So that's why we have this kind of Budapest Treaty to provide this kind of international security guarantee to Ukraine, and China is also part of the signatory. But now the situation today is totally different from that time. So really not optimistic.
问题是这样啊，这个 1994年这个布达佩斯协定呢，它实际是有一个背景的啊，就是前提呢是乌克兰呢同意放弃他所掌握的这个3700件核武器啊，当时还有数据是3500啊，但是不管怎么讲呢，乌克兰当时确实是一个理论上讲啊，至少是一个核大国啊，所以这是当时布达佩斯协定签订的背景，就是乌克兰同意弃核，同时呢，世界主要大国包括欧盟啊，是吧？这个给乌克兰呢提供这个安全保障是这样的啊，所以现在我们这个
I have to keep you short because we have no translator right now.
OK， 所以现在 OK，let's
let's
focus
we might
on
just review a little bit on your status.
Turkey.
The Budapest Pacts are including that the Ukrainian has given up the nuclear stockpiles.
对，所以我们现在还是更多的可能要关注土耳其这个外长是吧峰会啊，看这个两国外长呢能够谈出什么实际成果来。当然，我觉得确实这个像乌克兰这个是吧未来的中立地位是吧如何来保障啊，如何这个推进到这个实现中立地位，可能是两国外长重点关注的一个。
That's right. Even the Ukraine has been promised to be neutrality in a neutral stand, but how can they be guaranteed? How can they be protected? Is the core topic that will be discussed by the foreign minister from both sides. And Daniel, what? Oh, should we have maybe we can hear the Daniel's point, and we can get back to you. Daniel, what can we expect for this upcoming meeting between the two foreign minister?
Well, this meeting is really important, really. For two reasons. The first reason is this is the first time we're seeing a mediator take part in negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. As we've said before, previous meetings have taken place on a low level directly between Russian and Ukrainian representatives. This is the first time Mr. Çavuşoğlu, the Turkish foreign minister, will participate directly in mediation. And we've seen various leaders try to do this or express a desire to do this before, from Naftali Bennett of Israel, President Macron of France, Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia. This is now finally happening. Secondly, this is a meeting at a much higher level in a completely neutral country on a level of foreign ministers between Mr. Kuleba and Mr. Lavrov. Personally, I'm not optimistic that any key decisions are going to be made. Both sides have been very clear about their so-called red lines and so-called principles. And the red lines really boil down to Crimea and to the recognition of Donetsk and Lugansk. Russia insists the question of Crimea being somehow returned to Ukraine is totally out of the question. Kiev has previously said the territorial integrity of Ukraine is something that is not up for discussion at all. What can be up for discussion is the topic we are discussing: NATO models, neutrality, and some sort of security guarantees. And we saw the advisor to the president, Mr. Rahamia, say a few days ago that any sort of security guarantees given to Ukraine must be subject to multiple signatories, not only European partners like potentially France and Germany, but global superpowers very far away that aren't directly affected by this conflict: China, the United States. These countries have to get together and sign some sort of agreements which are concrete, which have legal standing, unlike, of course, the Budapest Memorandum, which resulted in Ukraine losing its nuclear power status, and unlike the guarantees which Russia has cited it received from NATO many times regarding its expansion eastwards. That's a very painful topic for Moscow. Mr. Putin has said many times that they were tricked. Moscow was tricked, Moscow was lied to by NATO when they said they wouldn't expand towards Russia's borders. I actually saw a clip of current President Joe Biden back maybe 25 years ago when he was still a senator for Delaware. It's a very interesting video where he was saying if there's one thing that would provoke a response from Russia, not necessarily a military response, but which would really get their blood boiling, that would be NATO expansion to the east, to the Baltic states. And Biden said that many, many years ago, as did actually the former ambassador to Russia as well. He said that, look, this is a taboo topic for Russia. This is something we cannot push them on. Yet that has happened.
Yep.
So any sort of security guarantees now on a non-NATO model, where Ukraine will have to enshrine in its constitution, renounce any claims to joining a military alliance, and in return receive security guarantees both from the West and from Russia, will require mediators. And China can be one of those mediators. Turkey can be one of those mediators. I think these talks will be not about resolving those red lines like Crimea, like Donetsk, Lugansk, but setting the groundwork, setting the framework for some sort of legally binding guarantees in a non-NATO model.
Yeah, you mentioned about NATO's role in this conflict, and I wanted to read you some of these comments coming from our users on Facebook. When someone said, when the Cold War ended, the Warsaw Pact got dissolved, but why has NATO survived and is still expanding? NATO's nature is to seek conflicts with non-NATO countries and imagined enemies. Daniel, what's your take on those comments?
Well, look, NATO was funded. NATO was founded, I should say, rather, to contain the Soviet Union and to prevent the so-called domino effect of communist ideology spreading throughout the world. That was their rationale. It was an alliance, a military alliance, founded in principle against Russia, against the former Soviet Union. There's no two ways about that. The Warsaw Pact by the Soviet Union, now Russia, was funded as a response to that. In 1991, when the Soviet Union dissolved, the Warsaw Pact dissolved, and some Central European states chose to join NATO, there was a lot of questioning about, well, what would NATO's role now be? The threat, the so-called perceived threat of communism is gone. The Soviet Union is no more. And Russian leaders, President Yeltsin, were so keen to embrace the liberal order and embrace capitalism. We saw, so much footage of President Boris Yeltsin dancing and chatting and hugging Western leaders, so keen to be accepted. And Russia actually applied or toyed with the idea of joining NATO on multiple occasions. They were rejected. It's not like Russia here was seeking a sort of a conflict with NATO. And again, we've seen the analogy expressed by many analysts multiple times. What would happen if Russia put some sort of military installations, military hardware, troops on the border with Mexico, or in Ireland, or in South America? And we saw what happened in 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The world was brought to the brink of nuclear war because of what happened. So it's clear there is a very heavy element here of double standards. And that narrative, again, Ms. Jing spoke about the media, the social media narrative. That's something that's simply not explored at all. This is being presented as President Putin waking up one day in a bad mood and deciding to invade Ukraine just to start a war and commit genocide against the Ukrainian people. This conflict has a very deep, long historical context and a history of Russian security concerns and Russian security demands being totally rejected and totally ignored. And we saw that in the lead up to this conflict. Russia was holding talks with NATO partners, with Western partners, where Russia put forward their security proposals. And they were, according to Russia, according to the Kremlin Foreign Minister Lavrov, totally rejected. He said there was some points which they could compromise on, but largely this was a rejection. So certainly this conflict is a tragedy for the people on the ground, no doubt. But this is a failure of diplomacy on both sides. But really, the NATO and the Western leaders do have a big, sizable role to play in that. Who knows how this would have ended if they simply sat down and agreed to the Russian security concerns? Things could be very different.
I think that's why China is keeping stressing that the reason behind this conflict is really complicated. They don't. I think they were trying to avoid this kind of what you mentioned about as a one-side story. So Jingjing, on the social media, so how people talked about this conflict and maybe talked about role of the NATO and because we understand there are some more reasons on a deeper level behind this conflict. So have you seen any of this kind of a discussion on those the deep analysis on this?
Yeah, you know what? Right now, if anyone says anything about NATO's role, NATO's provocations, you will be accused of useful tool of Russia. I mean, most of the people discussing the role of NATO is
that
not
is becoming
not
a political correctness.
Correctness, yes, but like guys, it's important to analyze the context, background, what led to the war like this. Okay, now I want to be clear. I'm not taking any side, but let's see the historical backgrounds. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, the NATO promised that they won't expand eastwards. But you know what happened in the past few decades? It included 14 new countries right to the doorstep to Russia. And if Ukraine joined NATO, you know how close the capitals are? I mean, probably just 1 or 2 hours by train. So Russia would have missiles pointing at their capitals so close. So I mean, these are legitimate concerns. And if you think anyone pointing out the NATO's role is kind of like folding agenda, well, you can take a look at the history. Actually, in the past 2 to 3 decades, world-leading strategic experts have been saying the same thing, and actually including Professor John Mearsheimer from University of Chicago, and including Henry Kissinger, including top diplomats from the West. They are from the West. They've been saying the same thing in the past 25, 30 years. If NATO continue to expand, it won't end well, because they are very clear that this is the right line for Russia. So they've been warning over and over that NATO should not expand. It will lead to war. And now there's a trending lecture on YouTube from 6 years ago by John Mearsheimer. It's called "Ukraine is the West's Fault." And I watched this lecture like several years ago, and it only got probably less than 1 million views. Now it got 20 million views. So now, because it's very relative now, so he'd be warning this situation we're seeing today 6 years ago. So I mean, if all the world top strategic experts have been warning this, saying the same thing, and they're from the West, they are not the useful tools of Russia. So why the West ignored these warnings from these experts? So I mean, the NATO really, and I'm not defending the conflict or the situation we're seeing today. It's very tragic. It's tragic for people in Ukraine. It's tragic for people in Russia. But there's a big context, because there's a legitimate concerns for Russia and for Ukraine. And also Daniel pointed out the Cuban Missile Crisis. And if someone may argue that Ukraine is a sovereign country, they can decide by themselves whether they want to join NATO. But okay, look, the same thing almost happened in history in the 90s when Cuba secretly moving the missiles from Soviet Union to Cuba, because Cuba wants to have some Soviet Union weapons in their country. But when the CIA found this image through their satellite, the United States, no, John Kennedy said, no, we don't want it. And it's tense. We almost had this serious, real missile war.
Sorry, Jingjing, I have to interrupt you.
So yeah.
I'm sorry, Jingjing, I have to interrupt you. We have some latest news coming out. And also, I need to have a little correction about what we said before. This meeting between the foreign minister of Russia and Ukraine is over. And what's coming next is the press conference on their meeting's outcomes. So, Jingjing, on the social media have been... Sorry? Is that a live signal?
Live for the press conference.
Our production team. I need to confirm that with our production team. So are we watching the live? Okay.
Yeah.
And
yeah, they're right here.
It's the live. We were seeing a live signal from Turkey, and we believe that was the press conference after the meeting of the foreign minister.
Okay, maybe let's look at this channel, our channel, CGTN, maybe.
Yeah,
now we are translating the press conference, and the foreign minister of Ukraine is
the foreign minister
doing a statement. She's doing something, but
maybe when this live stream's over, we can switch to the.
So Jinjing, let's get back to the social media talk because so now we have this outcome of the meeting between foreign ministers of both sides, and also before that there were 3 rounds of negotiation between both sides. How people talk about those negotiation, and how people are analysis on those on the several rounds of the negotiations outcomes.
I think I haven't noticed much about the negotiations, but I think most people, but I do see a dangerous trend on social media because most people are very one-sided. I mean, the media coverage are very one-sided. So, and the public have no choice. They're only receiving information from one side or one voice. I mean, as I mentioned in previous live streams before, it's very dangerous during a war that you're not paying attention to different voices. Because when there's a hot war, there's an information war. And I mean, every side will do propaganda during war. That's why you need to hear different sides, different voices, so you can come to a conclusion by yourself. And hearing different voices doesn't mean you have to agree with any of them. I mean, if you don't agree with Russia, if you don't agree with Ukraine, it's fine. But you need to be open to different sources of information so you won't be misled to a certain direction. And I noticed there are a lot of influencers trying to use social networks to influence public opinion.
I think we have to stop right here because the press conference is about to start. So that's all for our chat room today. And please stay tuned with us on CGTN, and we'll give you this live signal from the press conference in Turkey. Thank you so much for this informative discussion. We appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to this to our chat room, to the next episode of the chat room tomorrow. I'm Yan Zhao in Beijing, and bye for now.